great. But we want to welcome you guys to another episode of the Generation Z podcast. I'm Heriberto.
I'm Joel Ortiz, and today we have a special guest. We're sitting down with Sharina Perry, the founder and inventor of Utopia Plastix. She's also the only African American woman in the world in the space of compound resin. We want to thank you, Sharina, for joining us. We're super excited to talk to you.
Thank you all for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, we want to dive in a little bit on your background and talk about what made you the lady that you are today.
So, if we talk to, I'll always say, I believe even as young people, we have something in us that speaks to our heart. And that sometimes as we get older, that's a little bit suppressed. So, if we talk about where I'm at now in my journey, like why I chose Utopia and where we are at the early age of pre adolescence, I did not understand disparity. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand world issues because for me, it seemed like those problems could be solved if we just chose to do it a different way. So, my world, I created this world. It was called Utopia. And Utopia, we all got along. There wasn't where people couldn't eat, people shared, we took care of each other. But it was really spoke more to my heart of imagining if we chose to do it God's way. And so through my life, I kind of have built those ideals and principles to really be more intentional about the directions that I choose. So, through the course of my life, it was actually fast forward to when I started Utopia, it was really to address something that spoke to my heart. And my nephew at 19 was diagnosed with neurofibromatosis 2, which is an incurable growth of tumors. It had changed the quality of his life and left him with 30% hearing. And knowing that there was no cure, at one point we were at in his surgery in Dallas, and my sister in tears said, "Sharina, you have to do something." And that led me to studying plant material. That led me to cannabis and the ability for cannabis to shrink tumors. And with that, I tell people education turned my ignorance into advocacy and being a proponent for the medical use or the medicinal use and education and understanding of cannabis. So, in studying cannabis, I also learned about other plants in the family that could be used as an alternative to petroleum, cotton, and wood. As I looked at global issues, it was literally an event that it was literally an event as I was had been studying the plant material and learned that certain plants feasibility studies have been done as them being an alternative to petroleum, cotton, and wood by the USDA. But I was seeing, while I would see photos of that, I never saw really some of the products, especially as we were trying to address the issue of single use plastics. So it was literally an event. I was eating at a restaurant. They gave me a paper straw. It broke down to my drink in my drink. And that was kind of my point of this can't be the solution. So I made a straw in my kitchen. I decided I was going to make a straw using what I had learned with the study of plants to develop a solution.
Nice. So, how'd you actually go about starting that? You had this idea and you wanted to make it happen.
Well, I will rewind a little bit. I've been an entrepreneur for over 25 years. And so my businesses have kind of always been geared toward, I feel like I'm very good at examining shifts in industries, pivoting strategy. What do you do in those times to shift? Also, having to keep up with changes in your industry. I've spent a significant amount of my career in the cable and internet space, building mainly in the commercial side, government contracting. but also working with business owners to develop strategies to from concept to inception. So it's one thing to have an idea. Like I had an idea about how could I use this plant material and then creating a straw in my kitchen. What I did was, I mean, I really, and I say this often, I really don't believe there's anything I can't do because I know that if it matters to me and I put my mind to it, I'm going to walk out the steps and do the work
I love
until
that.
I see that becomes a reality. So, in this idea of that day at that restaurant, and why I say it was bigger than that, I always feel like we had see a problem and we think about a solution, but sometimes we don't think about whether that solution we created leads to another problem. And to me, the issue of paper being an alternative to petroleum didn't make sense because now we're cutting down trees to solve which to absorb, they are used to absorb the carbon to address a plastics issue, which carbon is a problem. So we have to then look at other things. But the other side of that is the human element. And so when we talk about sustainability, there's a human element of that. What happens when a manufacturer, that's all they make is single use plastics? What happens to those workers' jobs if that manufacturer doesn't find another source of material and doesn't have the revenue to modify their equipment? But studying plant material, and especially in crops that could be grown over and over again, to me, it seemed to be here these crops that absorb carbon at 4 to 5 times the rate of trees, remove heavy metals from the soil, add nutrients into the soil, required little water. Those seem to be a solution, but they also pulled in the community and the human element because now a farmer is growing a crop to make the products we consume every day. So that creates farmers spend money in their local communities. It also could create generational and long term wealth for farmers and landowners. And we're doing good for the environment at the same time, but we're also doing good for the economy. So, all those were literally things that remained in the forefront for me as I pursued this journey. So now, literally sitting there, I said, I'm going to do something about it. And that was make a straw in my kitchen. Well, I was really singularly focused on the idea of making a straw. And of course, I'd ran the numbers. The U.S. consumed about 500 million straws a day. If
Wow.
I could satisfy the demand of 10% of that, the the impact that it could make. So much to my surprise. And at that time, the straw that I made was hemp. And so I took this, I made this straw, and we coated it, thinking about coating that was healthy for food contact, um, to actually suck through it. So much to my surprise, once we coated the straw, it actually hardened in the drink.
Mm.
So if it hardened in a cold liquid, what would be the reaction to heat? So I took it over to the pot that I actually had coated it in beeswax and took that and got the temperature up to 340 degrees, and the straw still didn't break down. Now, that was
Wow.
totally different than anything that I had seen regarding
Yeah.
straws. So, there was an article in the New York Times about Starbucks' initiative to remove single use plastics. And there was a company interviewed in that article that was making products at bamboo. And it was the talk about what this shift looked like. At that time, paper straws made up 1% of the market. This shift would move them to 25 to 50% of the market. So That meant
Wow.
we would be putting a lot of pressure on our natural resources to solve this problem. So if I could look at an alternative that didn't put as much pressure on our natural resources, we would be able to do something. So I sought out I had this prototype, put it in front of that company that was interviewed at the time. One of the groups we were working with, actually, we had arranged and they took it to him. And he indicated that it was the best thing that they had seen in about 12 years. And if we could get it commercialized, we really had something. Well, um, that led me to reach out to the company that made that straw, and that was it
Mm.
was Aardvark. Hoffmaster had acquired them in 2018, but they were the largest global producer of paper straws. And I simply asked them if I can make the have the paper made, would you all turn it into straws and then do some additional testing? They agreed. That was more of a challenge than I thought. You think that, I mean, like I said, I think I can do everything, but there's a reason a lot of this with plant material hadn't happened. One, remember I had used hemp.
Mm-hmm.
Hemp had just become legal in 2014 with the Obama administration, and then 2018, the Farm Bill was passed. So there was also a considerable amount of regulation. So we have hemp used for industrial, and then we have hemp used for medicinal that's being used. And so here I'm in the industrial space. When you're legalizing something and you have parameters, especially like ties to universities and things like that, you also have some limits to the building of infrastructure to make sense, to make an economic impact. So there was very few companies doing anything in the space to get done what I needed. I happened to have been fortunate enough to find a company that had acquired a pulp mill. They pulped the material, and then it was sent to a specialty paper company made to the specs that Hoffmaster had agreed to make them. I mean, that had specified for us to make them. Hoffmaster received that in 2019, the paper, and then they subsequently made the straws and did the testing. Now, the significance of what I had done then is um, whenever you're putting a new product into market, when there's no infrastructure and you have a product that has existed, sometimes even when we have new inventions, we don't think about the cost
Yeah.
in a way that cost can literally price us out of the market. So even though it's a viable solution, it's not feasible. And then you have to wait for the market to catch up. I believe that's why sometimes inventors go into market, but the actual product that they invent, somebody else comes and takes it in market later because the market caught up. So I had to also think about um, what that looked like. And that led me to one, the paper that was sent to Hoffmaster actually had 25% and 50%. There were two different ones, plant material. And then the other component was your traditional wood. And with that, being able to do testing, what that allowed me to see was at what point could plant material enhance or change the properties and improve them with our traditional materials. That would give us two things. It would help reduce the cost of new product into market. It would also see if we could enhance the properties by combining different materials. And once that was completed, if I had done it in paper, I knew I could do it in the polymer space. So the first thing I did was, what does it look like to combine my IP with, and this is in the space of polymers, combine what the formalization that I saw with traditional fossil fuel polymers, but also creating it where there was a high plant load. I'll rewind a little bit. Remember when I said that, like, about a manufacturer modifying their equipment? It also wouldn't be a good solution if the only way that I can get this product into market is with one single company. We want it to really be a solution and not have manufacturers modify their equipment in doing it.
Hmm.
But my pursuit of making a straw made me realize that I had to have a compounded, stable resin in order to make it where my product was consistent, where it wasn't, I'm producing a product at one time, then it's something totally different later. And that essential requirement to get it compounded, based on what I had uncovered, it opened me up broader than just a straw. So that's another key part. Sometimes vision and we see something, we could sometimes be so centrally focused that we miss the broader element of it. And in this case, the pursuit of a straw led me to developing the science for a compounded resin that could be used in every application your traditional polymers would be able to use in without a manufacturer modifying their equipment, but being able to run equipment on lower temperatures, still having great yield, getting an eco-friendly product. And I'll say, like some of the manufacturers say, it smells like they're making cake when they're using our products in the so they don't have chemical smell either.
It's great that you're doing this, helping save the planet. We need more people out there like you out there.
Yeah, most definitely.
I've seen your utopian model. It creates an opportunity for the farmer. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you came up with that?
So it's interesting to kind of see so much talk about sustainability now and circular economy. So when you, like I said, when you have something that you're bringing into market, it's one thing to create something in my kitchen. It's one thing to begin to have a solution, but how do you build a model around that in a market that does not exist? So Utopia, again, is really about working together. I didn't come into this space to compete with manufacturing. I came into this space to be a solution. And so our model, the Utopia model, is circular, and meaning that we depend on each other. And it starts at the farmer. So the farmer grows a crop, then it's processed and goes into manufacturing and distribution. So when we process that crop and make our compounded resin, now I'll go back to why that's essential. There's also elements of business that create and propose challenges when you're using agricultural crops. Logistics can kill a business model, meaning that if I'm growing something in California and I have to process it in New York, I'm dead because that it just won't work. The cost is too great for the transportation cost. So building a model where these processing facilities could be put in multiple places that made sense so that when the farmer grows the crop, it's transported to our processing facilities. And then we take it to the compounding element there, and then at that point, that compounded resin is shipped throughout the country to manufacturers. So now they take this material and they make it their end product, and then it's distributed by the client, distributed to the consumer. And so remember what I also said about the crops that we use. Because we use rejuvenative crops that are good for the environment, we have 100% recyclable resin, a degradable resin, a naturally compostable resin, that when that product is used, 100% recycled means we can turn around and use that to make another product. But if it does end up in a landfill, when it breaks down, it's going to add nutrients back into the soil
That's
because of the
great.
Uh,
crops that it uses. So it's really not only when I look at sustainability, I look at sustainability in its true sense of how does this impact, and not just impact, but add value to our environment, our society, and then also our economy. So I want to add to it, not extract or take away. And so the Utopia model is centered around building what adds to. Like, we're doing good. We are intentionally, I don't know if you all saw our slogan, we do not create problems as we solve them. And that is an intentional part of what we do within that model. And the idea is of working together is you really don't ever want to leave. There's no reason for a farmer to leave the model, um, because as long as we continue to have manufacturers, distributors with these initiatives to do good, that they come into the Utopia family and Utopia model. And every time somebody decides, hey, we're going to use Utopia Plastics, a local farmer is benefiting from that,
That's
a
great.
process or manufacturer.
that's amazing. Well, I know that you go through a lot of steps, from the farmer to the processor. How did you start building relationships with them?
So, the one, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a farmer, I'm
Hmm.
not an engineer. I'm kind of some of those things now, but I wasn't going in.
Hmm.
The other part about feeling like you can do anything is being willing to learn. All of my industry, my entrepreneur career, I stepped into those spaces not knowing, but really with a willingness to learn. And sometimes in that path, in your willingness to learn, one, it requires humility, it requires the removal of pride and really wanting the best outcome. So let's say that you all were someone that I needed your help, but
Hmm.
you didn't have everything that in place to help me. I would go try to find what you needed, bring it back to you so that you could help me get what I needed. And in turn, I was actually helping you build what you were trying to do. And that's really what we did with manufacturers. It was also an education process. Manufacturers do what they do every day. Um, some of them were just excited that I was every time I ran into a challenge, I was willing to keep going and learn. And so then I'd come back to them and say, okay, I'm ready now. And so they ended up developing names in these facilities. Many of them are long generations of 4 or 5 time generations in manufacturing. And so one manufacturer gave me the name Reroute, so that is literally the nickname I have in their facility. And he says, because it seems like every time you run into a challenge, you don't let it stop you, but you'll reroute. He calls it the spinning circle, where you have to kind of reroute. Another one, that's how I got the name the Plant Lady, because they were just so, they had never seen someone so eager to get it done. Um, but I really, Utopia speaks to who I am as a person at my heart. And while I don't always get it right, I do try. And I, um, I really want to see the good. And this isn't, there's so much economic opportunity in what we're doing and being able to touch all these lanes. But I really feel like this model that we have, this sustainable ecosystem, can change the trajectory for how we see our world and how we move forward, and speak to the heart of what I think at the end of the day we all really want to do good. And sometimes we just don't know how. And there's not always the right stakeholders at the table to help move the needle forward. So we become discouraged. So that's my goal, to, I hope to change that.
Wow. So how do you prevent from being discouraged?
Um, I have, I will tell you, I'm my own critic, first of all, but I'm always willing to change and modify things. I learned through my life, I had to decide what mattered to me where I wouldn't lose Sharina. And so, how I get discouraged is I don't get discouraged, is the order of things that I have in my life. First, I feed my spirit person. Then I feed those that I love close into me, my family, my relationships. Then I feed my business. Then I feed community. Because essentially, we start off in this life, and I was guilty of it, a young mom and raising my daughter. And I feel like my kids spent more time at the office because I'm believing I'm chasing this dream of a better life for them. But along the way, I lost time because I was pouring in to do that. And we sometimes think, okay, we're going to take this time, it's going to be temporary, but life happens. So
Mm,
that that I created, I have to feed my spirit person to have the energy to feed anything else. I can only give the people the best if I am at my best. And so I being selfless matters to me. I believe that that's very important. Like, what value does Sharina add first? That's what only staying in places where I add value. But allowing my time, I control my time, not my time controlling me,
mm,
and being able to say no, this does not work. I also believe that through everything, ups and downs, peaks and valleys in life, I have a choice of whether I want to stay there in that valley. Um, if I don't tell myself that I need to come up to that peak, if I don't feed myself the positive thing, I can stay in that place. And so when a negative thought comes, I intentionally change my focus and feed myself. And then we have this thing in us that if we do these things, eventually they become patterns of behavior and almost seamless. So now in my life, it's not something that I feel like I really seem to have to work at or labor in. It's just part of my life and how I move. I have a teenage sons, and one of my sons asked me one time. He said, "Mom, do we always have to do the right thing?" And I said, "What's the alternative? Would you choose to do the other?" And for me, it's provoking thought beyond just what really looking at the better outcomes. Like, what do I want to see? What do I want to see? If I don't want to see this negative thing, don't get lost in it, right? Figure out how I can see it better. But I think also I'm inherently solution driven. Staying in problems really frustrates me because I'm like, if I'm staying in the problem, I'm stuck, and movement matters. I
yeah.
also don't get discouraged because I don't compare myself to other people. I don't view myself through the lens of others. So I'm highly purpose driven. I've always kind of been that way since kid, like what matters to me. I'm, like I said, my own critic, and I use the expression, I challenge myself to my own greatness. Sharina wants to grow. Sharina wants to be better. How does Sharina do that? And in this life, we all have gifts, we all have talents. My goal is to use them to God's glory and not bury my talents, to run my race. So in running my race, I'm never thinking about the person beside me, behind me, or in front of me, like if they're beating me at anything, because at the end of the day, to get through this life, endurance is what wins the race.
You know,
It's not about the competition. So if I do any of that, focus too much on the people beside me, behind me, in front of me, I'm slowing myself down and I'm not really tapping into what's in me. And that is how I continue to stay encouraged.
Okay. What goals do you have for your business for the years coming?
So eventually, I truly believe that through this model and how the events of 2020 really showed us that change matters in
yeah,
across so many ways. If we look at it from business, if we look at it from society, we it's change. I love that Generation Z is using their voice and leading some of this change. I eventually, and I believe whether it's through my lifetime or later, Utopia will be in every household in the world. And that it's more about the message. And Utopia Plastics is a vehicle to give us a message of what it looks like if we truly choose to do it God's way.
We always like to end asking, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word is alignment because for me, and I spoke to doing it God's way and aligning with His will. So if I focus on what His will and purpose is and knowing how I'm created, that becomes the thing that drives me. That's what I work toward to stay in alignment. When things seem off, it's kind of like driving a vehicle. When we're driving a vehicle and the alignment is off,
Mm-hmm.
we're wobbly, we're confused, we're frustrated, right? Sometimes and you're like, is this going to break down? By keeping that alignment, we stay in the direction and focus that we want to go. So being aligned is extremely important to me. And that if you've ever been to the equator, they do a little deal sometimes where they put a leaf in a bucket. And if you are, I had the opportunity to go to Kenya. And if you put that leaf in the bucket and you're on the equator, if you move north of the equator, it turns clockwise. If you move south of the equator, that leaf turns counterclockwise. If you go out 100 meters or so from that line, it spins out of control. So I kind of use that as that equator, that center is the center that we have. And while we have liberty to go left or right, and we'll still have some direction, if we go too far, we wonder why things begin to spin out of control. So staying close in alignment helps me to stay focused and in control and move the way that I need to move through my life.
I really love that, Sharina.
yeah,
I always accept invitations from young people who are doing things, especially. I believe that you guys are leading. I told people long ago Gen Z was going to be the generation and those younger millennials to really change the trajectory of what we see, and they would use it in technology. And so, I mean, I get the opportunity to work with a lot of college students. I'm going to start working with OU as far as some alternatives for their football players for recruitment.
Wow.
So I do a lot with leadership programs as well, even down to Girl Scouts. So thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us today. It was a great
Thank
talk.
you guys.
yeah.
You
Thank you
gave
for
us a
sharing.
banger for sure.
Well, thank you guys.
All right,
All
enjoy
right.
the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
So much. It's a pleasure meeting you.
You all too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.